2014 had been a turbulent year for 600 members. Three of their most infamous members, D Rose, Rondo No. 9, and C-Day, would all be taken off the streets for good after being implicated in high-profile murder cases. And with the murder of their star rapper L.A. Capone in 2013, it would seem that the gang lifestyle was truly catching up to them. But despite these losses, the remaining members would continue to carry the flag for their set musically. On the 4th of June 2014, 600 member 600 Breezy drops his track Don't Get Smoked. This track would be a gangbanging anthem for 600 members. The music video would show Breezy and other 600 members on their block toting serious firearms, including the infamous 600 Mac. The track's lyrics are pointed disses at all of 600's numerous ops, including rapper TTB Nez and his TTB or Train to Blow set from the low end, also known as Suwoo, which have strong ties with their mortal enemies 051 Young Money, as well as 051 themselves, more specifically their fallen member Fathead, who was killed at only 14 years old in 2012. Breezy would also diss Brick Squad and their fallen member Lil Jojo, who was killed at only 18 in 2012, with 600, particularly D Rose, having allegedly been involved, together with numerous other people, as well as rapper Lil J from STL, who had made a name for himself since 2012 by heavily dissing Chief Keef, O-Block, and all of their affiliates, and who at that point had already miraculously survived getting shot 9 times, and would not long after the release of this song end up getting shot 6 more times, earning him the bizarre nickname from DJ Academics, the Chirac Wolverine, as well as P5, aka Crack from Jaro City, who was allegedly killed by King Von from O-Block in 2012, along with a number of other people who may well have been affiliated with 600. In the song's outro, 600 Breezy continues the dissing by mentioning numerous dead members from rival gangs, including Tuka, real name Shondale Gregory from STL, and Tutu from Jaro City, both killed in the war that had been waged between the different sets around the Washington Park and Woodlawn neighborhoods during the 2010s. Don't Get Smoked also featured a famous lyric that supposedly mentioned the score between 600 and their ops, putting it at 6-24. This became a famous lyric that had been repeated and remixed by many other Black Disciple rappers like King Von and Lil Durk. The lyric itself would spark intense debate and speculation as to whether this quoted score of 6-24 in favor of 600 was indeed an accurate depiction of the actual score in the ongoing gang war between 600 and their enemies. Now, I'm certainly not condoning the use of any kind of scoreboards when it comes to gang wars, and this video is far from any kind of scoreboard video, but arguably, when you look at the people involved, this score could well be accurate, as at this point, there were indeed 6 people on 600's side who had unfortunately lost their life to the gang wars so far. However, as far as 24 of their enemies being killed, this was much more difficult to prove, but it could well add up if you're considering members from the many other gangs that 600 were beefing with. Now, for the record, this would be an unfair way of keeping score, as essentially it omits anybody that's passed away on the O-Block side of the war, but includes basically anybody that 600 has had a beef with. Meanwhile, others have theorized whether the numbers 6-24 wasn't actually the real score, but in fact a coded diss aimed towards 600's ops in Taekwon World. This is because Taekwon Tyler, who Taekwon World is named after, actually died on June the 24th, 2012, or 624, and many ops of 600 from Taekwon World have publicly stated how much they hate this combination of numbers in a date. Or perhaps more likely, 6-24 may well even be an elaborate play on words, or in this case numbers, to represent the letters B and D in the alphabet, with 6 representing the 6 of 600 and 24 representing the B and the D standing for Black Disciples. And this is actually what 600 Breezy himself says in the very next line of the song, where he raps how all of his friends are 2-4. Regardless of the exact explanation, these bold lyrics would put 600 Breezy on the map as the next big rapper to look out for from 600. But meanwhile, in the streets, things would unfortunately keep heating up, and only days after this song released, another high-profile murder would unfortunately take place. MOB member Scrapp, real name Brian Weekly, was seemingly responsible for the murder of beloved 600 member Lil Steve that had caused 600 members to rename their hood Steve Drive in his honor. Although Scrapp was a feared shooter by himself and known for allegedly killing Lil Steve, Scrapp's family also had deep ties within the MOB gang. Scrapp was the younger brother of Ruger, who was the biggest rapper to come out of MOB, well, at least until Lil Mo from the younger generation begun making a name for himself. But Scrapp would also try his own hand in music, making several songs and music videos over the years, often collaborating with his brother Ruger and even his cousin, FBG Duck, as well as his close friends Buki and Dusky the Man. They would even have Lil Jojo, who made the controversial track BDK before his death in 2012, appearing in their biggest song, Ain't Nothing Bigger, which is an anthem dedicated to their street set MOB, and in his verse, Scrapp would diss both D-Thang and Lil Steve. Besides the obvious diss towards D-Thang, aka Devon, these lyrics once again reference how Lil Steve had supposedly tried to kill Scrapp, which is why Scrapp allegedly ended up killing him first, as he would imply several times on Twitter. This was a sad turn of events because, as mentioned mentioned before, years prior, many 600 members were even very close with Scrapp. Tay Capone would actually explain that Scrapp went to the same school as McAdoo from 600, and he would bring him around other members playing basketball. And as Scrapp and Ruger's father, Big Les, would later claim in an interview, the war with 600 ultimately began with his youngest son, Scrapp. Big Les would explain how McAdoo had stayed in Scrapp's house multiple times, and Scrapp would stand up for Mac in their school when anyone would try and beef with him.
Bad about him, because to be honest with you, I love Machiavelli, and I love him like a son. And for me seeing and knowing what happened between him and my son, I know what happened. Machiavelli stayed at my house. Machiavelli slept at my crib. I took Machiavelli to play ball with my sons. Machiavelli was with me, under me, with my son Scrapp. You know what I'm saying? So Machiavelli was just on this side, Scrapp was over here. But they still used to be together every day, you know what I'm saying? And the streets, like I said, the streets divided them.
As the beef between MOB and 600 got more serious, so too did the relationship between McAdoo and Scrapp. And eventually, Scrapp would even publicly tweet that he wanted to kill McAdoo and Tay 600 just like Baldy. One of his friends around this time, Rico Reckless, would later appear on No Jumper, where he would discuss just how bloodthirsty Scrapp was in the streets around this time.
I knew Scrapp was a real savage one time, but one time I picked Scrapp up. I picked Scrapp, Baby, Stain, I think like Freaky or something. I just had like an old Lincoln. So now it's all of us up in my Lincoln, but it's like the old school Lincoln that fill up with, and we used to put hella guns in them. One time Scrapp get in the car, we only been in the car for like 2 minutes, I swear to God, he get in the car, damn, I'm ready to kill. I said, oh, we dropping his ass back home. This is bad.
Scrapp was seemingly a loose cannon, and at times it could be hard to tell whether he was joking or serious. There's one famous clip from the many vlogs that MOB shot around this time where Scrapp shoots at a head with what appears to be a BB gun. But seriously, in the streets of Chicago, running up on someone like this could be very deadly, and sadly, Scrapp's savage reputation may have ultimately caught up with him in the end. Something which, strangely, Scrapp himself may well have anticipated, as his brother would later say in one interview.
But I told him before he left out of the door, I'm like, bro, you gotta calm down, bro. Ain't in this store for what you doing, but life, but definitely in jail. And I told him that, promise you, before he walked out the door. He looked at me in my eyes, he say, I know I'm gonna die anyway, I see it coming, I promise you. He said his exact words the day he left out of the house and he died, literally.
As Ruger has also mentioned, Scrapp had actually been shot not once, but twice in the 2 weeks leading up to his death.
My brother got shot 2 different occasions before he just died, before he died in 2014. And within 2 weeks. So 3 occasions, the third one was the one he died. I promise you, within 2 weeks. The first one he got hit in his leg, in his thigh. Over some goofy, but he got shot, you feel me? And it went in and out. It kind of healed up a little bit, a little fast. He was walking. Then he got hit in his chest. A week, like 4, 5, 6 days later, in his chest, came out his arm, went straight in and out. It kind of healed up a little fast. He felt like he can go right back out. He kept going back out there in them streets, bro.
After the second shooting, he even proudly posed for a picture, brandishing his rifle and showing off his wounds. Scrapp was seemingly not scared of getting shot or killed, and he felt the desire to remain in the streets until the bitter end. On the 7th of June, Scrapp was out on the 5600 block of South Warbush Avenue in the early hours of the morning. He was with a 20-year-old man in an alleyway when a black Dodge Charger with all tinted windows would pull up. A towel was apparently used to cover the vehicle's license plate, and the shooters were seemingly planning to catch their target and get away as quickly as possible. Both Scrapp and his friend were sprayed with bullets and hit multiple times before that car fled the scene, and Scrapp would reportedly die at the scene whilst his friend would be taken to Stroger Hospital in critical condition. Just 3 years after the murder of Lil Steve, Scrapp had been gunned down less than 1 mile away from where Steve's life was taken. And although his killer has never been caught, many people on the internet have argued that members of 600 were behind the hit, with Just Blow being mentioned as one of the potential shooters. Later the same morning of Scrapp's murder, Just Blow would tweet that he was smoking on Scrapp, to which someone would reply, laughing how he should at least wait a bit before dissing somebody who had just been killed a few hours before. He would also allegedly post a video of himself being on 600's hood near the site of Scrapp's murder scene on the night leading up to his death.
On the block all night.
It's even believed that Just Blow, formerly Justo, took on this new nickname shortly after the killing of Scrapp. However, one alternative rumor would circulate, suggesting that the killer was actually another 600 member, Lil Boo. According to this theory, the killer couldn't be Just Blow, as Tay Capone would later openly claim in Instagram comments that Just Blow had actually never killed anyone from MOB. Tay Capone seemingly knew what had happened, and months after the death of Scrapp, he would tweet taunting MOB and claiming that nobody had been killed in retaliation after Scrapp's murder and implying 600 were responsible. Tay would also explain in a Cam Capone interview that ultimately Scrapp had done something that had 600 on his ass forever, likely the murder of Lil Steve.
Say for instance, like before he ended up doing what he doing, if a motherfucker like would have caught Scrapp, he probably would have, depending on who it is, he probably would have given him a pass, like, I knew you before this shit. You feel what I'm saying? But it's on with your homies, you feel me? But Scrapp ended up doing some that had 600 on his ass forever, you know what I'm saying? And it was just, it was up after that, and he ended up getting whacked. You know what I'm saying? Eventually, the streets caught up with him, because they had toured with a lot of people, you know what I'm saying? So he ended up becoming one of them victims of the streets, but it's like, before all that, it's like, he was gonna be a victim to somebody, but it was just like, it's probably that knew him before this probably would have been like, you know.
However, it's also largely disputed that 600 could have even killed Scrapp, and many have suggested an alternative theory that an unrelated gang called Shields may well have been responsible. Shields is a Gangster Disciple and Mickey Cobra gang set from around 57th and Shields in the Inglewood neighborhood, which is right on the other side of the Dan Ryan Expressway that goes through the south side, only a few blocks away from MOB's hood. Now, relatively little is known about this set other than the fact that they have a long-lasting war with MOB, as well as 600's ally, Lamron, which is also located in Inglewood. Now, many people believe that Shields were responsible for Scrapp's death due to the fact that MOB members would post GDK for Scrapp around the time of the killing. Moreover, Shields rapper Khalifa Waymo would dedicate a diss track to MOB, and particularly their top rappers Ruger and Lil Mo, where he would rap, "The funniest thing I ever saw was Scrapp begging for his life," implying that he was present when Scrapp was killed. Shields member Loney B would also chime in, claiming that Shields was responsible in YouTube comments supposedly from his personal account, where he would reply to a comment querying why Shields claimed Scrapp's murder when they thought 600 were responsible, with him commenting, "Lol, stop it, we caught Scrapp in Dat Alley." After literally admitting that it was his gang who committed the murder, he would then go on to accuse the other commenter of sounding like the police with their questions. Now, one commenter would ask why people thought that 600 were responsible, to which he would reply that it's only because 600 were MOB's biggest ops. Now, this would be the same account where he would post the song Scrap From My Plug, another diss song that's obviously all about smoking on Scrapp. Another rapper from Shields, Michi, would also rap about the murder of Scrapp in his song Ain't For None, by rapping how Scrapp got caught up in that alley and he ain't make it back. The music video for this was then removed from YouTube before it was re-uploaded years later. But as nobody has been officially charged or convicted for this murder, we might never know for sure who was responsible. There's been many misleading social media posts from Scrapp's family regarding the murder, such as Scrapp's blood brother commenting on Facebook claiming that 600 were responsible for shooting his brother after posting that Rondo number 9 is lucky he's in jail. On the other hand, Scrapp's father would post to his Facebook story in 2018 dissing Shields, making many think that that must be related to the murder. After Scrapp's death, some members of MOB would begin referring to themselves as Scrapp Gang in his honor, and due to the notoriety that Scrapp's name carried in the streets, Scrapp Gang would eventually become a name that many of the young members would rep exclusively, in a similar way to how O-Block eventually begun to replace the earlier name for Wick City that was mainly used for members of the Black Disciples from Parkway Gardens, but with both names essentially meaning the same thing.
Alright, I get a lot of stuff on the internet about MOB and Scrapp Gang. What's the difference between the two?
There's no difference.
No difference at all?
It's all the same.
All the same? Okay. Same area and everything?
Same area, same everything. It's just more so it was a younger person that died, you know what I'm saying? So the younger people had a different feel for Scrapp, and it was like a Scrapp Gang, like, you know, just like everybody else do.
However, some older members of MOB seemingly don't share the same view, suggesting that only the real members go by MOB only. Despite Scrapp's name staying alive even amongst the younger members like Lil Mo, who were still just kids when he was killed, the sad reality was that once again, another person had lost their life to this ever-escalating gang war, and unfortunately, things were far from over. And already, by the end of that same month, another local gang known for their bitter beef with 600 would end up losing one of their members to the streets too. 051 Polo, real name Michael Patton, was a 17-year-old boy from the 051 neighborhood. He would also seemingly rep 051 Young Money the gang, although he was likely more of a hang-around member rather than somebody who was actively sliding with the gang looking to kill ops. Sadly, Polo himself would end up being caught up in the feud between 051 and their enemies, with tragic consequences. On the 30th of June 2014, Polo was walking with a 15-year-old friend around his neighborhood on the 600 block of East 50th Place. There, a black van pulled up alongside the pair before having a short conversation. Then, a passenger inside that van would open fire on the teens, hitting Polo in the chest and his 15-year-old friend in the right arm, and sadly, Polo would die at the scene. The aftermath of this horrific shooting was actually witnessed by a photojournalist called Vincent D. Johnson, who was actually watching the rainstorm that was going on outside of his apartment window when he saw a young man in distress calling for help. Upon approaching the scene, he would actually notice Polo was lying face up in a gutter and immediately called the emergency services. Surrounding Polo were two other teenagers, one of them appearing traumatized, pacing back and forth and recalling, "They shot my brother." But whilst waiting outside for the police to arrive, Johnson would unfortunately witness Polo take his last breaths, later describing these final moments in a moving article that he wrote for the Chicago Sun-Times. After the arrival of the police, Vincent then decided to go back inside his apartment to get his camera. He would return, capturing chilling images of Polo's body covered in a sheet, drenched in the rain as detectives combed the scene during the storm. These events are a stark reminder that members of these gangs could lose their lives anytime, any place. Whilst many of the neighborhoods, like much of Washington Park and Woodlawn, are overwhelmingly populated by some of the poorest inhabitants of Chicago, other neighborhoods nearby, such as 051's hood on the northeast corner of Washington Park, are actually slightly more gentrified. This means that you might have an established journalist living amongst some of the most notorious gangs in the city. Now, this is partly due to this area being slightly closer to downtown, along with ongoing gentrification of many of the hoods of Southside Chicago, but also due to the fact that the University of Chicago has its main campus covering a large portion of the neighborhood on the east side of Washington Park, called Hyde Park. Therefore, while the Washington Park neighborhood on the west side of the park is over 90% black, with a median household income of $30K, Hyde Park on the east side is much more racially diverse, boasting a much higher median income, almost double that of the west side. Because of this specific location of 051's neighborhood, relatively close to both downtown and the University of Chicago campus, as well as the surrounding middle-class neighborhood of Hyde Park, fans of Chicago drill have even written long theories about how gentrification and demographic changes may well affect 051's ability to recruit new members in the future. But back to the story. Following the murder of Polo, 051 members would tweet their tributes to him, and rumors would circulate about who well may have been behind the murder, with some 600 members being prime suspects in these theories. However, one particular tweet from 051 Driller in 2015, questioning who else had been killed for Get Back for LA Capone besides an innocent cab driver, would make it seem as if Polo's death may well have been unrelated to 051's beef with 600. The following months would remain relatively quiet for 600, but unfortunately, at the end of 2014, the streets would once again become deadly and another young man would lose his life. This time, the person would end up being somebody who had ties to both sides of the war. Lil Nick, or Nico, real name Nicholas Campbell, was a 15-year-old kid from the Washington Park neighborhood. More specifically, he lived around the 5800 block of King Drive, which is right next to the hoods of both MOB and 600. Growing up, Nick would also seemingly be close with both members of MOB and 600, and can be seen in photos with guys like E-Day, as well as with guys from MOB. In fact, in January 2014, Nick would post to Facebook explaining how he was going to beat up a guy called Derek, which would start a long back and forth between him and another boy named Trayvon. At one point during the back and forth, Trayvon would point out how Nick had previously been claiming to be 600 and MOBK, but had since switched sides and was now affiliated with MOB, to which Nick would reply saying that he'd been MOB forever. Nick was also seemingly close with members of STL and would make a tribute post to none other than KI after she was allegedly killed by King Von from O-Block in April 2014. But then in May, Nick would once again post on his Facebook, this time tagging that he was with a member of 600, Young Famous, aka Hassan Moore. Once again, next month in June, after MOB Scrapp had been killed, Nick would often post tributes to him, often saying how he was also Scrap or Die. But in November, Nick would make several cryptic posts. In the first one, he would say that people wanted to get at him because he messes with his own family. He would also end this post by saying that he's F57, F Travis, Scrap or Die. This was a reference to that other nearby set called Shields, who had rumored to have been the ones involved in the murder of Scrap. This would start a back and forth with a member of MOB who would question if Nick was now repping MOB, to which Nick would reply that he will always be Scrap or Die. This would make members of MOB threaten to catch Nick, to which Nick would respond by saying that he was going to smoke them. Nick would then make another post saying that the same people that he'd grown up with had switched sides on him, tagging two MOB members in the post. This would start another long back and forth where one of the MOB members would say how Nick used to be MOB crazy, but then flip back to 600 many times, and saying that this kind of talk would get Nick killed. To this, Nick would respond that he hadn't flipped, they just thought that he was 600, to which the MOB member would reply saying that Nick is 600. And then, about a month later in December, Nick would be out in the far southern suburb of Harvey, where he would be at a place that was once an illegal strip club that had ultimately been busted and shut down some months earlier. Allegedly, Nick was outside that location, but not just with anyone, but members of 600, particularly Just Blow. In the early morning hours of December the 7th, Nick would seemingly be caught off guard in the parking lot of that abandoned club. Someone would turn up, shooting Nick multiple times, and he would ultimately later pass away in hospital. That very same day, one of the members of MOB, who had been fighting with Nick just a month earlier, would even post a tribute to him, saying that even though Nick had been messing with the ops, it was still RIP. And some of Nick's friends would even start their own set in honor of him, which they named Nico Gang, and their territory being the area around where Nick lived. Meanwhile, Nico Gang has actually kept a good relationship with 600, and in the years following Nick's death, members of 600 have even posted tributes to him. This relationship has been rumored to have formed due to the fact that Nico Gang actually has heavy beefs with MOB, with it ultimately being MOB who likely killed Nick. However, in 2016, one of the members of Nico Gang would reply that actually it wasn't the ops that killed his homies. But whatever the case, later that year, 600 Breezy would post that Nick's killer had been killed while shouting out Nico Gang. Nick's story is a cautionary tale, and it just shows how attempting to be cool with both sides of a gang war is a fine line that very few people can survive. 2014 was a turbulent year for 600, with C-Day, Rondo, and D-Rose being taken off the streets for good. More murders would also take place, with people on both sides losing friends, a stark reminder that in the gang wars, there can never really be any winners. But with new members getting more recognition in music, such as 600 Breezy making his debut, it would seem that there would finally be a potential way to escape the streets, and soon 600 Breezy would have a golden opportunity to escape the cycle of violence that took the lives of so many of his friends like LA and Rondo, who could have used music as a way out. However, in the end, that opportunity would end up being largely squandered, and starting in 2015, 600 would suffer more devastating losses in the streets, starting to be what many believe to be the downfall of 600.